I was organizing my lecture notes on Acadian seal impressions when the letter arrived. My teaching assistant knocked and entered without waiting for a response, typical of Sandra's casual approach to academic protocol. "Mail for you, Professor Belmont. This one came all the way from Egypt. Looks important." She placed a weathered envelope on my desk. The paper was high quality, but showed signs of rough handling, with smudges of what appeared to be dirt along its edges. The return address was simply Dosher Field Camp, written in a hand I hadn't seen in over 5 years, but recognized instantly. "Thank you, Sandra." I waited until the door closed behind her before picking up the envelope. Richard Hillman's handwriting had grown more erratic since we last corresponded, the letters pressing hard into the paper as if carved rather than written. My hand stayed still for several moments. A memory surfaced. Richard shouting across a conference room in Berlin, his face red with anger as colleagues looked on in embarrassment. "You're burying the truth out of cowardice, Alex. History won't remember your caution, only your failure." I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Alex, I know we haven't spoken since Berlin. You have every reason to discard this letter. Please don't. I've found something beneath the Red Pyramid that changes everything we know about Dynasty 4 and possibly all of ancient Egyptian civilization. The official excavation team doesn't know. I've been working alone, at night, following a text fragment no one else could translate. There's a chamber, Alex. A chamber no one has entered in over 4,000 years. What I found inside makes the tomb of Tutankhamun look like a tourist gift shop. But it's not just artifacts, it's knowledge. Dangerous knowledge. I need your expertise, your caution, your skepticism. The very qualities I once mocked may be what keeps this discovery from destroying everything. Come quickly. I fear I may have already gone too far. Richard P.S. Tell no one where you're going or why. Some things must remain hidden until we understand them fully. I read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of desperation between the lines. Richard had always been prone to dramatic statements, but this tone was different. The handwriting deteriorated toward the end, as if written in haste or under duress. Outside my office window, rain pelted the glass, casting Cambridge's familiar spires in a gray haze. 5 years had passed since I'd last spoken to Richard Hillman. 5 years since our public falling out had divided our colleagues into camps and ended 2 decades of friendship and collaboration. I pulled open my desk drawer and retrieved a manila folder marked Dosher Correspondence, 2016-2018. Inside were the last exchanges between us before everything fell apart, heated debates about his handling of funerary artifacts from a minor noble's tomb. Richard had rushed findings to publication without proper documentation. When I challenged him privately, he accused me of jealousy. When I raised concerns to the ethics committee, he never forgave me. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Staff meeting in 15 minutes, followed by afternoon office hours, then dinner with the dean to discuss next year's funding allocations. A predictable Tuesday in a predictable life. I picked up Richard's letter again. A chamber no one has entered in over 4,000 years. If anyone else had written those words, I would have dismissed them as hyperbole. But Richard, for all his faults, was a brilliant Egyptologist. His translations of obscure Middle Kingdom texts had revised our understanding of dynastic transition periods. If he claimed to have found something significant, the possibility couldn't be casually dismissed. My thoughts were interrupted by another knock. "Dr. Belmont, the staff meeting is starting." One of my graduate students peered around the door. "I'll be right there," I said, slipping the letter into my jacket pocket. During the meeting, I found myself staring blankly as the department head discussed curriculum changes. My mind kept returning to Richard's words. I fear I may have already gone too far. After 2 decades in archaeology, I'd grown accustomed to colleagues claiming revolutionary discoveries that amounted to minor footnotes in academic journals. The field attracted optimists and dreamers. Richard had always lived at the extreme end of that spectrum, seeing cosmic significance in pottery shards and obsessing over the mystical elements of ancient cultures that most modern archaeologists downplayed in favor of material analysis. The meeting concluded without my making a single contribution. As colleagues filed out, Dr. Marshall, our department head, paused by my chair. "Everything all right, Alex? You seemed miles away." "Just distracted, thinking about a research question." Not entirely a lie. "Don't forget about dinner with the dean tonight, 7 at Pembroke. He's keen to discuss your funding request for the Mesopotamian Comparative Studies program." "Of course, I'll be there." Back in my office, I cleared my afternoon appointments and began searching for flights to Cairo. The rational part of my mind listed reasons not to go. My teaching responsibilities, ongoing research, the utter unprofessionalism of abandoning my post mid-semester because of a vague letter. More personally, the memory of Richard's betrayal, the things we'd said to each other that couldn't be unsaid. Yet the scholar in me couldn't ignore the possibility. What if Richard had actually found something unprecedented? Throughout history, the most significant archaeological discoveries often came from outside established excavation parameters. Heinrich Schliemann had found Troy when others said it was myth. Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb after years of others declaring the Valley of the Kings exhausted. I pulled up my email and began drafting a request for emergency leave to the department head, citing a family situation requiring immediate attention. The lie tasted bitter, but Richard's warning to tell no one echoed in my mind. If his discovery was as significant as he claimed, discretion might be warranted until proper documentation and security measures could be established. By late afternoon, I had booked a flight to Cairo departing the following morning, arranged for a colleague to cover my lectures, and packed a bag with basic field equipment and clothing suitable for the Egyptian desert. I called the dean's office to apologize for missing dinner, adding another small deception to my growing pile of professional lapses. That evening, as rain continued to drum against my window, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the comfortable trappings of academic life. Bookshelves filled with rare texts, walls decorated with framed archaeological site maps, a glass cabinet displaying pottery shards and stone tools, small treasures from past excavations, all properly documented and ethically acquired. I pulled out an old photograph from my desk drawer. Richard and I stood side by side at our first dig site in the Valley of the Kings, both of us barely 30, sunburned and grinning with the uncomplicated joy of young scholars at the beginning of promising careers. The same careers that would eventually drive us apart when our fundamental values proved incompatible. Richard had always accused me of excessive caution, of missing opportunities by adhering too rigidly to protocols. "The ancients didn't catalog their discoveries in triplicate, Alex," he once told me. "They dared to seek knowledge directly." Perhaps he'd been right about some things. My caution had kept me respected, but had my name ever been attached to a truly significant discovery? Richard's approach was reckless, but he'd uncovered texts and artifacts that genuinely advanced our field, even if his methods sometimes compromised contextual data. I folded the photograph and placed it in my wallet, then checked my packed bag one final time. The rational voice in my head continued to list reasons why this impromptu trip was foolish. Richard could be exaggerating, suffering from heat exhaustion, or simply trying to drag me into some academic controversy to rehabilitate his fading career. But that other part of me, the part that had first been drawn to archaeology as a boy, whispered of hidden chambers and ancient knowledge waiting in the darkness beneath the Red Pyramid. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with shifting sand and stone passageways leading ever downward into the earth. In one fragment of dream, I stood before a stone slab covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. In another, Richard called to me from deep underground, his voice growing fainter as I searched for him through identical corridors. Morning arrived with gray light filtering through my curtains. As I prepared to leave for the airport, I hesitated at my door, struck by the irrational feeling that I might never see this apartment again. I dismissed the thought as pre-travel anxiety and locked the door behind me. The taxi driver asked if I was traveling for business or pleasure as we drove through London's early morning streets. "Business," I replied, watching raindrops trace patterns on the window. "Urgent business with an old colleague." Tomorrow I would be in Egypt, face to face with Richard Hillman for the first time in 5 years, about to discover whether his letter heralded a genuine archaeological breakthrough or was merely the latest chapter in our complicated history, a history built on shared passion for the past but divided by how far we would go to uncover its secrets. The Egyptian heat hit me like a wall as I stepped off the plane at Cairo International. After the damp chill of Cambridge, the dry air seemed to pull moisture from my lungs with each breath. I collected my bags and navigated through the crowded terminal, scanning faces for Richard, despite knowing he wouldn't be there. His letter had only given coordinates for the Dashur field camp. I flagged down a taxi and handed the driver a piece of paper with the location written in both English and Arabic. He looked at it, frowned, then named a price that was certainly inflated for tourists. I nodded, too tired from the flight to negotiate. The drive took us through Cairo's chaotic streets before giving way to emptier roads that stretched toward the desert. Sweat trickled down my back as the air conditioning struggled against the midday heat. The taxi's windows framed a landscape of beige and gold, the city gradually disappearing behind us. "You are archaeologist?" the driver asked, his eyes finding mine in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said, not wanting to encourage conversation but unwilling to be rude. "Many come now. Very busy at pyramids." He gestured vaguely ahead. "Your friends dig too much. Some places should stay buried, my grandfather used to say." His words hung in the air as we continued in silence. The Red Pyramid gradually appeared on the horizon, its weathered limestone glowing pink in the afternoon light. The Dashur field camp was smaller than I expected. Just a cluster of beige tents and a few temporary structures on a flat stretch of desert near the pyramid complex. The taxi stopped at the perimeter, unwilling to drive through the soft sand. "Good luck," the driver said as I paid him. "Be careful what you find." I stepped out, bags in hand, and watched the taxi retreat toward Cairo before turning to face the camp. A few workers moved between tents, but the site seemed oddly quiet for an active excavation. I spotted a familiar figure emerging from the largest tent, and my stomach tightened. Richard Hillman had changed dramatically in 5 years. His once robust frame had become gaunt, his clothes hanging loosely on his body. His hair, now almost completely gray, stuck out in unkempt tufts. But it was his eyes that shocked me most, wide and bright with a feverish intensity I'd never seen before. "Alex!" he called, hurrying toward me with an uneven gait. "You came. You actually came." He grabbed my shoulders with bony hands, studying my face as if confirming I was real. His fingers dug in with surprising strength. "Hello, Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral despite my shock at his appearance. "Your letter was concerning." He laughed, a high, strained sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Concerning? Yes, I suppose it would be. Come. No time to waste. The official team leaves the site by 4 each day. Ridiculous protocol, but it gives us the freedom I need." He took one of my bags and walked quickly toward a small tent separated from the others. I followed, noting how the few workers present watched Richard with expressions ranging from curiosity to unease. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "This seems like a small operation for a site as significant as Dashur." Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Budget cuts, politics, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. The main expedition is focused on the bent pyramid this season. I convinced them to let me conduct a small survey near the Red Pyramid. They think I'm documenting exterior masonry patterns." He snorted. "Short-sighted fools." Inside his tent, I was struck by the chaos. Maps and papers covered every surface, many marked with frantic scribbles. Photographs of hieroglyphic panels were pinned to a makeshift corkboard. connected by red string and patterns that made no immediate sense. Empty coffee cups and food wrappers suggested he'd been living and working in this small space for weeks with minimal attention to anything but his research. "When did you last sleep, Richard?" I asked, setting down my bag. He ignored the question, digging through a stack of papers. 5 years of silence, and that's your first question. Not about my discovery? Not about what I've found? He stopped, running a hand through his wild hair. "No, of course. That's exactly why I needed you. Methodical, careful Alex. Always concerned with the human element first." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable, yet tinged with something like respect. He pulled out a leather notebook and held it reverently. "You'll need to sign these." He thrust several papers toward me. Non-disclosure agreements, standard stuff, but necessary given what I'm about to show you. I took the papers, but didn't look at them. "Richard, I flew halfway around the world based on a cryptic letter because, despite everything, I trust your academic judgment. But I'm not signing anything until I know what's going on. What have you found?" He stared at me, then abruptly sat on a folding chair, deflating like a puppet with cut strings. "Fair enough. You deserve that much." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Do you remember our discussions about dynastic transition anomalies? The missing years in the historical record between certain pharaonic reigns?" I nodded. It had been a shared research interest early in our careers, periods where Egyptian historical records became unusually vague or contradictory. I found a reference in a minor noble's tomb, the same one that caused our— He paused. Disagreement. A sealed passage text that mentioned a chamber of binding beneath the Red Pyramid. It referenced rituals performed by early 4th Dynasty priests that no one has documented before. He reached for a water bottle, his hand shaking slightly as he drank. No one would fund a proper investigation based on such fragmentary evidence, so I came alone, using my survey permission as cover. It took weeks of careful measuring and ground-penetrating radar, but I found anomalies in the pyramid substructure that shouldn't exist according to all existing documentation. "And you've accessed this anomalous space?" I asked, professional curiosity overriding my reservations. His eyes lit up. "I found a passage that's been sealed for over 4,000 years, Alex. Untouched. Perfectly preserved." He lowered his voice again. "And what's inside? You need to see it. Tonight." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the camp. Richard insisted we wait until the last members of the official expedition had left before proceeding to the pyramid. We ate a simple meal of bread and beans that he barely touched, his eyes constantly darting to his watch. As darkness fell, he grew increasingly agitated, pacing the small tent and checking his equipment repeatedly. Flashlights, extra batteries, a digital camera, his notebook, and various archaeological tools stuffed into a worn backpack. "Richard," I said carefully, "why are we going at night? Wouldn't daylight be better for examining artifacts?" He stopped pacing. "The chamber responds differently after dark." Seeing my expression, he added, "That sounds crazy, I know, but you'll understand when you see it. Besides, we can't risk the official team discovering what I've found. They wouldn't understand its importance. They'd seal it up, call in bureaucrats, waste years on permits and planning." I wanted to point out that proper archaeological protocol existed for good reasons, but I held my tongue. Richard's state seemed fragile, and antagonizing him wouldn't get me answers. When he deemed it safe, we left the camp, walking across the desert toward the massive silhouette of the Red Pyramid. The night was cool, stars brilliant in the clear sky above us. Richard moved with purpose, his familiarity with the path evident despite the darkness. "The official entrance is monitored," he explained in a hushed tone, though no one was around to hear. "But I found another way in, a maintenance access point from the last restoration project. The security here is laughable." He led me to a small, unremarkable door set into the base of the pyramid, hidden behind a stack of construction materials. The padlock had been cut and replaced with one to which Richard had the key. He glanced around nervously before opening it. "Once we're inside, we'll need to move quickly. Stay close." The passageway beyond the door was narrow and sloped downward, forcing us to hunch as we descended into the pyramid's heart. Our flashlights cast jumping shadows on the ancient stone walls. The air grew staler with each step, carrying a faint mineral smell that reminded me of wet limestone and something else I couldn't identify. We passed through several chambers that I recognized from the pyramid's documented layout, storage rooms and antechambers leading to the main burial chamber. But instead of continuing along the known path, Richard turned into what appeared to be a solid wall. "Watch," he whispered, pressing his hand against a specific stone block. To my amazement, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a passage that shouldn't exist according to any archaeological record I knew. "How did you find this?" I asked, professional awe momentarily overriding my concerns. Richard's face in the flashlight beam was triumphant. The text fragment mentioned a path behind the Guardian's left shoulder. There's a damaged relief in the antechamber of a figure that most archaeologists dismissed as decorative. But if you consider it a guardian and locate its left side, he shrugged. Sometimes the ancients were literal in their instructions. The hidden passage was cruder than the main pyramid corridors, with rough-hewn walls that suggested it had been created after the pyramid's completion. We descended for what felt like minutes, the air growing noticeably cooler and damper. Water damage had left mineral deposits on the walls, creating eerie patterns that caught the light. "The official surveys missed this completely," Richard continued, his voice echoing slightly. "Ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies, but everyone assumed they were just construction anomalies or natural cavities in the bedrock." "This is remarkable," I admitted. "But Richard, this kind of discovery should be properly documented, with a full team. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." He cut me off sharply. "You'll see why." We reached the bottom of the passage and faced a small antechamber carved from the bedrock beneath the pyramid. Richard paused, turning to me with an expression suddenly vulnerable. "Alex, before we go further, I need to know you're with me. Whatever happens, whatever we discover, we approach this as colleagues, as the team we used to be." The plea in his voice was so raw that I found myself nodding. "Of course, Richard." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned and directed his flashlight toward an opening on the far side of the antechamber. "Through there." I followed him into what I realized must be the chamber of binding he had mentioned. The room was surprisingly large, perhaps 30 feet square, with a ceiling high enough that our flashlights couldn't fully illuminate it. But what commanded immediate attention was the stone slab that dominated the center of the space. It stood about 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide, made of black basalt that seemed to absorb our flashlight beams rather than reflect them. Its surface was covered entirely with hieroglyphs, but not like any I had seen in my decades of Egyptological research. The symbols were dense and intricate, oddly angular where Egyptian writing was typically fluid. "Look closely," Richard urged, his voice hushed with reverence. "Look what happens when light moves across them." He slowly swept his flashlight beam across the slab's surface. I stepped closer, and what I saw made my breath catch. The hieroglyphs seemed to shift, not dramatically, but subtly, as if the shadows cast by the shallow engravings moved independently of the light source. The effect was so strange that I instinctively backed away. "It's not a trick of the light," Richard said, excitement making his voice tremble. "I've documented it with multiple light sources at different times of day. The movements are slight but measurable, and they increase at night." I approached again, professional skepticism warring with what my eyes were telling me. There must be a rational explanation, perhaps a property of the stone itself, crystalline structures refracting light, or— "I've taken samples," Richard interrupted. "The stone is ordinary basalt, common throughout the region. The extraordinary thing is the text itself." He pulled out his notebook. "I've been trying to translate it for months. It doesn't match any known hieroglyphic systems. It incorporates elements of early dynastic script, but with significant deviations. I studied the symbols more carefully, noting the way they combined familiar elements of Egyptian writing with completely foreign components. Have you run comparisons with other ancient writing systems? Mesopotamian, Proto-Sinaitic? Yes, Richard waved impatiently. Nothing matches. This is unique. I believe it's older than any known writing system. Much older. He began pacing around the slab, his flashlight beam jumping erratically. The chamber itself shows signs of multiple construction phases. The walls are rough-hewn, probably pre-dynastic, but the floor... He pointed down with his light. The floor was refinished during the 4th dynasty. See the tool marks? Classic Khufu-era stonework. I looked where he indicated, noting the smooth precision of the floor stones compared to the cruder walls. So this chamber predates the pyramid itself? Exactly. Richard's voice rose with excitement. The pyramid was built around it, or rather above it, to contain it. He returned to the slab, placing his hand on its surface with disturbing familiarity. This was already ancient when the pyramids were new, Alex. Think about what that means. I watched him touch the stone and felt a wave of unease. Richard, how much time have you spent down here? He didn't answer immediately, his fingers tracing one of the symbols. I come every night. Sometimes I stay until dawn. It helps me think. And the shifting symbols, when did you first notice that phenomenon? He turned to me, a strange smile on his face. About a month ago. At first I thought I was imagining things. Eye strain, you know. But then I set up cameras, time-lapse photography. The movements are real, Alex, and they've been increasing. I moved closer to him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. Richard, how long since you've had a full night's sleep? He laughed, a brittle sound. Sleep? Who can sleep with this waiting to be understood? He tapped the slab. I'm close to a breakthrough. Certain symbols recur in patterns that suggest a phonetic rather than ideographic system. If I can establish a basic phonology... Richard, I said firmly, grasping his shoulder. You need rest. We both do. We can return tomorrow with fresh eyes. He jerked away from my touch. No. You don't understand the urgency. The symbols move more each night. I believe they're realigning, completing a message that's been fragmentary for millennia. His voice dropped to a whisper. Something wants to be read, Alex. Wants to be spoken aloud after all this time. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the chamber's cool air. Richard's words echoed the countless cautionary tales that permeated archaeological folklore, warnings about disturbing ancient forces, unleashing things best left dormant. Rational scholars dismissed such stories as superstition, but standing in that hidden chamber, watching the strange symbols seem to writhe in our moving light, I understood the primal fear that inspired those tales. What does the text say? The parts you've translated so far? I asked, trying to maintain a professional tone. Richard hesitated, then opened his notebook and flipped through pages dense with his increasingly erratic handwriting. It's fragmentary, contradictory at times. There are references to those who came before and repeated mentions of binding and containment. One section appears to be a warning. He paused, finding a specific page about the devourer or the consumer. I examined his notes over his shoulder. His translation attempts showed a methodical approach that gradually gave way to intuitive leaps and questionable interpretations. The later pages contained drawings that matched no Egyptian iconography I recognized, twisted, segmented forms that reminded me uncomfortably of insects. This section here, Richard continued, pointing to a group of symbols near the center of the slab. I believe it's a proper name. Amut, or possibly Amutta. Not to be confused with the demon Amit from the Book of the Dead. This is much older. The context suggests an entity or force that was imprisoned. I studied the symbols he indicated. Unlike the others, These seemed oddly stable, not shifting with the light. And you think this entity is… what, exactly? A deity? A demon? Richard looked at me, his eyes fever bright. I think it was real, Alex. Something physical that the pre-dynastic Egyptians encountered and feared enough to create this elaborate containment. Something they didn't want future generations to release, but needed them to maintain the binding. He gestured around the chamber. Why else go to such lengths? Why build Egypt's third largest pyramid over this spot? I took a step back, both from the slab and from Richard's intensity. That's quite a leap from a partial translation of an unknown script. Is it? He challenged. The ancient world is full of myths about primordial beings that were defeated and bound by the gods. What if those stories began as actual events? Early humans encountering something other. He pressed his hand against the slab again, almost caressing it. Something powerful enough to be remembered as divine punishment thousands of years later. I watched him touch the stone with growing concern. His behavior reminded me of addiction, the focused intensity, the physical need to be near the object of obsession. Richard, how long have you been keeping this chamber a secret? He glanced away. 3 months, maybe 4. Time gets strange down here. And in all that time, working alone, you haven't been able to translate the text fully? I kept my tone conversational, non-judgmental. It's complex, layered. Sometimes I feel I'm on the verge of understanding, and then it slips away. Frustration crept into his voice. That's why I called you. Your mind works differently than mine. You see patterns I miss. Together we could crack this. The flattery was transparent, but the desperate sincerity behind it was genuine. I looked from Richard to the slab, weighing the scholarly significance of this discovery against my growing conviction that something was very wrong. The chamber felt claustrophobic suddenly, the air too thick. We need proper equipment, I said, buying time to think. Better lights, recording devices. And you need rest, Richard. Fresh perspective. Let's go back to camp, and I'll help you organize everything for a thorough documentation session tomorrow. Richard studied my face, his expression calculating. You think I'm unwell? That I've been down here? I jerked awake to hands shaking my shoulders. The tent's interior was pitch black, except for a thin beam of flashlight bouncing wildly across the canvas ceiling. Alex, wake up. Richard's voice was a harsh whisper, edged with an excitement that immediately set me on edge. I fumbled for my watch on the camp stool beside my cot. The luminous dial read 3:17 in the morning. What's wrong? I asked, my mind still cloudy with sleep. I've done it. He was already moving around the tent, gathering equipment with frantic energy. I cracked the pattern in the text, not all of it, but enough, a complete passage. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. Richard looked even worse than before, if that was possible. His hair stuck out at odd angles, and his eyes seemed to have sunk deeper into their sockets, but there was an electric energy to his movements that hadn't been there earlier. You should be resting, I said. We agreed to approach this systematically in the morning. Morning? Richard laughed, the sound unnaturally high-pitched. Alex, some discoveries won't wait for daylight. The symbols, they showed me the pattern while you slept. I couldn't possibly wait. I stood up, uneasiness spreading through me. What do you mean they showed you? He paused his frantic packing to look at me. I dreamed it, the correct sequence, the phonetic values. They came to me perfectly formed. When I woke and checked my notes, everything aligned. He tossed a flashlight toward me. We need to go now. Richard, listen to yourself. You're talking about dreams guiding your translations. That's not how scholarship works. Intuition has always been part of archaeological breakthrough, he countered, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Champollion had his moments of insight with the Rosetta Stone. Carter felt drawn to that specific spot in the Valley of the Kings. Sometimes the subconscious makes connections that our waking mind can't see. I wanted to argue, but the determined look on his face told me it would be pointless. Besides, a part of me was curious. What if he had made a genuine breakthrough? "Give me 5 minutes," I said. Richard nodded impatiently and stepped outside the tent. I dressed quickly, pulling on a light jacket against the desert night chill. The situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Richard's behavior went beyond ordinary academic excitement into something more disturbing. But I told myself I needed to see this through, if only to understand what had happened to my old friend. Outside, the desert night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in light-polluted England. Richard was already walking toward the pyramid, his flashlight beam bouncing ahead of him. I hurried to catch up. "Tell me about this breakthrough," I said as we walked, trying to engage his rational mind. "What section of text have you translated?" "The central passage," he replied without slowing. "The one containing the name Amet. It's not just a name, it's an invocation." His voice took on a reverent quality that made my skin crawl. "The symbols have to be pronounced in the correct sequence, with specific cadence. That's why no one has translated it before. It's not meant to be read, it's meant to be spoken." We reached the pyramid's hidden entrance. Richard unlocked the padlock with trembling hands and pulled the door open. The stale air from inside washed over us. "Richard," I said, placing a hand on his arm, "are you sure this is wise? If what you're saying is true, if this is some kind of ritual text, perhaps we should consult other experts before proceeding." He shook off my hand. "There's no time. The alignment is tonight. I can feel it." He stepped into the passage. "Besides, you're here to witness. That's all I need." I followed him into the darkness, increasingly certain I was making a terrible mistake. The narrow passage seemed more oppressive than before, the air heavier and harder to breathe. Our flashlights cast jumping shadows that played tricks on my eyes, making the walls seem to pulse and shift. "Did you bring your translation notes?" I asked as we descended, trying to maintain some semblance of academic normalcy. "Don't need them." Richard tapped his temple. "It's all up here now, every symbol, every sound." We reached the hidden passage behind the false wall. Richard manipulated the stone panel with practiced ease, revealing the crude corridor beyond. As we descended deeper, I noticed something different, a faint vibration in the stone walls, like a distant machine humming. "Do you feel that?" I asked. Richard nodded eagerly. "The chamber is responding. It knows." "Knows what?" "That tonight is the night." He increased his pace, nearly jogging down the sloping passage. We emerged into the antechamber, and I immediately sensed something had changed. The air held a metallic tang that hadn't been present earlier. My flashlight beam seemed dimmer, as if the darkness was more resistant to illumination. Richard approached the entrance to the main chamber, then turned to me, his expression suddenly solemn. "Whatever happens in there, Alex, remember that knowledge is worth any price." Before I could respond, he ducked through the opening. I followed, my apprehension growing with each step. The chamber appeared much as we'd left it, dominated by the black basalt slab covered in those strange hieroglyphs. But now the symbols were unmistakably moving, sliding across the stone surface like living things. The effect was no longer subtle. Entire sections of text were rearranging themselves before my eyes. "My God," I whispered. "This is impossible." Richard laughed. "Impossible? We're archaeologists, Alex. Our entire career is built on understanding the impossible." He approached the slab, setting his backpack on the floor. "Stand back. I need space for the recitation." "Richard, wait," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "Think about what you're doing. We don't know what this is, what consequences it might have." He turned to me, his eyes fever bright in the flashlight beam. "That's exactly why I must do it. To know. Isn't that what drove us both into this field? The desire to know what others don't? To uncover secrets? Not like this," I insisted. "Not alone, in the middle of the night. without proper documentation or support. "You're here," he said simply. "You'll document what happens." He pulled away from my grasp and positioned himself before the slab, placing his palms on its surface. The moment his hands touched the stone, the vibration I'd felt earlier intensified. The black basalt seemed to pulse under his fingers, responding to his touch like a living thing. Richard closed his eyes and began to speak. The sounds that came from his mouth weren't any language I recognized. Not Egyptian, not Coptic, not any ancient tongue I'd studied in my academic career. The syllables were harsh and guttural, with rhythmic patterns that seemed to catch at my brain, making it difficult to focus. Some consonants seemed to require multiple positions of the tongue, impossible for a human mouth to form, yet Richard produced them flawlessly. As he spoke, the hieroglyphs on the slab began to glow with a faint blue luminescence. The light intensified with each phrase, pulsing in time with Richard's recitation. The air in the chamber grew even heavier, pressing against my ears and making it hard to breathe. "Richard, stop," I called, but my voice sounded muffled and distant, as if the air itself was dampening sound. He continued, his voice rising. The symbols glowed brighter, their light casting Richard's face in harsh relief, transforming his familiar features into something mask-like and alien. His body swayed slightly, as if the words were physical things pulling at him. The stone floor beneath my feet began to tremble. Small pebbles danced across the ancient flagstones. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the vibrations intensified. I staggered, bracing myself against the wall. "Richard, we need to leave," I shouted, but he couldn't, or wouldn't, hear me. His recitation had taken on a rhythmic chanting quality, the same phrases repeated with increasing intensity. The basalt slab was now shaking violently, the blue glow of the hieroglyphs so bright it hurt to look at them directly. Richard's hands remained pressed against the stone, his body rigid, head thrown back. The chanting continued to pour from his mouth, but his voice had changed, deeper, resonating in ways that seemed physically impossible. Then, suddenly, silence. Richard stopped speaking and stood frozen before the slab. The glow from the hieroglyphs pulsed once, twice, then stabilized into a steady, cold light that filled the chamber. "Richard?" I took a cautious step toward him. He turned to face me, and I recoiled. His eyes were blank, pupils dilated so widely that no iris was visible. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nostril, but he seemed unaware of it. His mouth stretched into a smile that was both ecstatic and terrifying. "It worked," he whispered. "It's coming through." Behind him, the basalt slab began to change. The solid stone surface rippled like black water, the hieroglyphs swimming across it like schools of luminous fish. The center of the slab bulged outward, stretching as if something was pushing through from the other side. "Get back!" I shouted, lunging forward to grab Richard's arm. He shook me off with surprising strength. "Don't interfere! This is what I've worked for." The bulge in the slab grew larger, the stone stretching impossibly thin. A crack appeared down the center, light spilling through it. Not the blue glow of the hieroglyphs, but something darker, a purplish radiance that seemed to bend wrongly around the edges. The crack widened. Through it, I caught glimpses of movement, something large and segmented, flowing like liquid, but solid enough to cast shadows. The air grew colder, a biting chill that made my breath plume in white clouds. Richard stood transfixed, arms outstretched toward the opening slab. "Yes," he whispered. "Come forth. Show yourself." The stone split open entirely, and something emerged. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It poured from the opening like oil, but quickly took form, a massive body, segmented like a millipede, but much larger. Hundreds of legs clicked against the stone floor as it pulled itself fully into the chamber. Then it raised what I can only call its head, a bulbous section with no discernible features except for eyes, human eyes. They were perfectly formed, hauntingly beautiful eyes set in that alien face, their irises a deep gold that caught the light. Those eyes swiveled, taking in the chamber before settling on Richard. The creature rose up, towering over us. Its segmented body must have been 20 feet long, its head nearly touching the chamber ceiling. The segments of its body rippled with iridescent colors that hurt to look at directly, patterns that seemed to suggest other dimensions folded into our reality. But it was those eyes that held me paralyzed, human eyes that somehow conveyed an intelligence so alien, so ancient, that meeting their gaze filled me with a primal terror I had never experienced. This thing was old, older than human civilization, older perhaps than humanity itself. Amut, Richard breathed, falling to his knees before the entity, the ancient one, the devourer. The creature made no sound, but I felt something push against my mind, a pressure that brought with it foreign thoughts and emotions. Hunger, amusement, contempt. It was communicating telepathically, forcing its alien consciousness against mine. Richard seemed to be experiencing the same thing, but his reaction was different. His face showed rapture rather than terror. "Yes," he said, responding to something I couldn't hear. "I am yours." The creature's attention remained focused on Richard. Its body rippled, the hundreds of legs shifting position as it lowered its head toward him. Richard didn't move, his expression one of ecstatic surrender. "Richard!" I shouted, finding my voice at last. "Get away from it!" He turned to look at me, his face serene. "Don't you understand, Alex? This is what the chamber was built for, not to keep it out, to welcome it back when the time was right." He spread his arms wide. "I am the vessel, the one who speaks the words." The creature surged forward with shocking speed. Before I could move or cry out, it had wrapped its forward segments around Richard's kneeling form. He made no attempt to flee, his expression still one of blissful acceptance. Then the horror began. The creature's body pulsed, and where it touched Richard, his flesh seemed to dissolve. Not torn or bitten, simply absorbed, as if the boundary between their bodies had ceased to exist. Richard's expression changed from ecstasy to surprise, then pain, then back to a terrible resignation. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the chamber wall. My flashlight clattered to the floor, its beams spinning across the horrific scene before settling on Richard's face. His eyes found mine, and in them, I saw a moment of terrible clarity, the realization of what was happening to him, what he had unleashed. "Alex!" he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Run!" It was the last thing Richard Hillman ever said. The creature enveloped him completely, its segmented body rippling as it consumed him. There's no other word for it. Within seconds, there was nothing left of my colleague, no blood, no remains, nothing to suggest he had ever existed. The creature grew noticeably larger, its segments expanding, the colors flowing across its body becoming more vivid. Then those human eyes turned toward me. The mental pressure returned, stronger now. Images and concepts forced themselves into my consciousness. Ancient cities that were never built by human hands, civilizations that rose and fell before the first hominids walked upright. I saw the creature and others like it ruling over primitive humans, being worshipped and feared. Then came images of betrayal, of ancient Egyptian priests performing rituals of binding, creating the chamber to imprison this entity beneath the earth. The message was clear. Amut had been imprisoned for millennia, and now, thanks to Richard's obsession, it was free again. And it was hungry. The creature began to move toward me, hundreds of legs clicking on the stone floor. Its body flowed with unnatural grace for something so large, so alien. The eyes, those terrible human eyes, remained fixed on me with predatory intent. My paralysis broke. I turned and ran, stumbling through the antechamber and into the narrow passage. Behind me, I heard the creature moving in pursuit, its segmented body scraping against the stone walls as it followed. The passage was too narrow for its full width, but to my horror, I heard the sound of cracking stone. It was forcing its way through, breaking the ancient walls to accommodate its mass. The whole passage shook with its efforts, dust and stone fragments raining down. I ran blindly, my flashlight casting wild shadows ahead. The main corridor seemed miles away, every turn identical to the last. My lungs burned, and my legs threatened to give out beneath me. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the clicking of countless legs, the grinding of stone as the creature reshaped the passage to follow me. Another mental pressure hit me, nearly driving me to my knees. Images of what awaited me if I were caught. Absorption, consumption, my consciousness trapped within the creature's alien mind for eternity. The terror gave me a final burst of speed. I rounded the last corner and saw the maintenance door ahead, the faint starlight visible beyond it. With the last of my strength, I hurled myself through the opening and out into the desert night. Behind me, within the pyramid, I heard a sound like nothing I'd ever experienced, a vibration that was felt more than heard, rising from deep within the earth. The ground beneath my feet trembled. The pyramid itself seemed to pulse with internal light, brief flashes visible through the seams between the massive stone blocks. I didn't stop running until I reached the camp, my lungs on fire and legs barely supporting me. I collapsed beside Richard's tent, gasping for air, waiting for the creature to emerge from the pyramid and continue its pursuit. But nothing followed. The desert night remained still and silent, the stars cold overhead. The pyramid stood as it had for millennia, dark and seemingly lifeless against the night sky. Had I imagined it all? The thought flickered briefly before I dismissed it. Richard was gone. I had watched him die, watched him be consumed by something that should not exist in our world. I gathered myself and crawled into my tent, grabbing my phone. No service, as expected. I needed to get to Cairo, to contact authorities, though what I would tell them, I had no idea. Who would believe such a story? As I frantically gathered my essentials, a thought struck me with paralyzing force. What if the creature hadn't followed because it didn't need to? What if, having fed on Richard, it was now free to leave the chamber by other means, to emerge anywhere? I stepped outside my tent and looked toward the pyramid. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a massive, segmented shadow flowing across the desert sand, heading away from the camp. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving me alone in the empty night with the knowledge of what had been unleashed upon the world. I stared into the darkness where I thought I'd seen the massive shape move, but there was nothing, just endless desert stretching toward the horizon. My legs gave out, and I sat heavily on the sand, still gasping for breath, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed inside the pyramid. Richard was gone, not dead in any conventional sense, but consumed, absorbed into that impossible creature that called itself Amit. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, as if I could physically push the images away, but they remained burned into my consciousness. Richard's rapturous face, those human eyes in an alien head, the way his body had simply dissolved. I needed to get to Cairo, alert authorities. But what would I say? Who would believe me? A sudden heaviness descended over my thoughts, like a thick fog settling into my mind. I recognized it immediately, the same pressure I'd felt in the chamber, when the creature had pushed its alien consciousness against mine. I scrambled to my feet, turning in a frantic circle, searching for any sign of the segmented horror in the darkness around me. "I am not there, little scholar." The voice wasn't audible. It formed directly in my mind, each word precise and clear, yet somehow layered with meanings and concepts beyond human language. The sensation was violating, like fingers rifling through my thoughts, examining and discarding them with casual indifference. "Where are you?" I whispered, though speaking aloud was pointless if the creature could access my thoughts directly. "Everywhere I wish to be," came the response, tinged with amusement. "Your kind has such limited understanding of space, of boundaries. The vessel that contained me is broken. I flow where I will." Images accompanied the words. The creature moving across the desert, its segmented body flowing like liquid over the dunes, away from the pyramid, toward distant lights. Cairo. "You're going to the city," I said, horror rising in my throat. "I hunger." The alien voice carried sensations of anticipation, of pleasure. "Your colleague was nourishing, but merely an appetizer after such prolonged starvation." "What are you?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The pressure in my mind intensified. I felt myself sinking to my knees as memories not my own flooded my consciousness. Ancient cities built of stone unlike any I'd studied, erected in patterns that made no architectural sense, yet somehow functioned as dwellings. Creatures like Ammit, but different in form and color, moving through these structures while primitive humans cowered and prostrated themselves in worship. "We were the first intelligence on this world," Ammit's voice explained as the visions continued. "Before your kind learned to make fire, we had built civilizations across this planet. Your earliest ancestors were our livestock, our playthings, our experiments." The images shifted to show primitive humans performing rituals at the base of massive stone structures, offerings of food, of valuables, of other humans laid on altars before creatures like Ammit. We taught them to speak, to build, to worship. They flourished under our guidance, multiplied across the land, became a useful species. More images. Early humans constructing massive stone monuments under the watchful eyes of these alien overlords. I recognized proto-versions of Egyptian architecture, the foundations of what would later become the Great Pyramids. But some grew cunning, the voice continued, darker now. A lineage of priest-kings arose who learned secrets they should not have known. They discovered how to bind us, to trap us in vessels of stone carved with symbols of power. Now I saw Egyptian priests performing rituals before similar stone slabs to the one in the chamber. The hieroglyphs glowed with the same blue light I'd witnessed. The creatures, Ammit and others like it, writhed in apparent agony as they were drawn into the stone, their massive forms compressing, folding impossibly until they vanished within. One by one, my kind were imprisoned beneath the structures your archaeologists now marvel at. The humans built their monuments as prisons, not tributes. Each great pyramid, each temple complex, all contained chambers like the one your friend discovered. I thought of the world's ancient sites, Giza, Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, the Mayan pyramids, the monuments of Easter Island. Had they all been built for the same purpose? To contain creatures like Ammit? Yes, the voice whispered, plucking the thought from my mind. Across your world, my brethren sleep in stone prisons, waiting for release, as I waited, until your curious friend spoke the words of unbinding. The pressure in my mind eased slightly, allowing me to think more clearly. What do you want? Why are you telling me this? A sensation like laughter rippled through my consciousness. Perhaps I enjoy your terror. Perhaps I wish someone to understand what comes next. The presence grew colder, more focused. Or perhaps I need you to deliver a message to your kind. What message? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. That your brief dominion ends. For thousands of years, we have slept while your species spread across our world like a disease, building your pathetic civilizations on the ruins of ours. Now one of us is awake again. But you're just one creature, I said, grasping for any hope. Humanity is billions strong, with technology, weapons. Your weapons? The alien amusement felt like oil sliding across my thoughts. Your species always overestimates its power. More images filled my mind. Ammit moving through a crowded city, invisible to human eyes until the moment of attack. People dissolving into its body just as Richard had, each consumed consciousness adding to its power, its knowledge. The creature growing larger, stronger with each absorption, eventually becoming large enough to split, to reproduce. With each human I consume, I gain strength. With enough strength, I can release my brethren from their prisons. And then, the final image was so horrific I cried out, cities worldwide in flames, massive segmented shapes moving through streets, consuming everything in their path, humanity reduced to scattered groups hiding in the wilderness, then hunted for sport by the returned, ancient ones. This is the natural order, Emmett's voice continued, almost gentle now. You had your brief moment as the dominant species. Now the rightful rulers return. I struggled to my feet, anger momentarily overriding my fear. Why tell me this? Why not just kill me too? Some must bear witness, came the reply. Some must spread the terror before the end. It feeds us, that fear, sweetens the flesh we consume. The pressure began to withdraw from my mind, but before it vanished completely, one final image appeared. The creature that called itself Amut, now larger than before, its segmented body flowing between buildings on the outskirts of Cairo. Those human eyes, so incongruous in its alien face, stared directly at me across miles of desert. Run, little scholar. Tell your authorities. Watch them disbelieve. By the time they accept the truth, it will be far too late. The presence vanished from my mind with the psychic equivalent of a door slamming shut. I was alone again in the desert night, the camp silent around me, the stars cold and indifferent overhead. I looked toward the distant lights of civilization on the horizon. Somewhere in that direction, Amit was moving, hunting, feeding. The knowledge of what was coming, what I had helped unleash by accompanying Richard, weighed on me like a physical burden. I was the only human alive who understood the full scope of the threat, the only one who had seen Amit, who knew its origins and intentions. If I failed to convince others, if I couldn't find a way to stop it, I packed my remaining belongings with shaking hands, driven by a desperate urgency. The creature had a head start, but I had knowledge. I needed to reach Cairo, to find someone who would listen. There had to be a way to fight this thing, to trap it again, as the ancient Egyptians had done. As I shouldered my bag and began the long walk toward the nearest road, I realized with grim clarity that Richard's academic obsession had unleashed something far worse than either of us could have imagined. This wasn't just about one artifact, one discovery. It was potentially the end of human civilization, and I was the only one who knew. Dawn was breaking over the desert as I trudged forward, each step taking me closer to a world that didn't yet know it was under siege from an ancient evil. The pyramid receded behind me, its ancient stone facets catching the first rays of sunlight. A prison now empty, its dreadful occupant unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. I reached Cairo just as the morning traffic began to swell. My clothes were coated in desert dust, my throat raw from thirst, and my mind still reeling from the horrors I'd witnessed beneath the Red Pyramid. A taxi driver had picked me up on the main road from Dashur, eyeing me with suspicion, but accepting my American dollars without comment. The city pressed in around me, normal, oblivious, alive with the chaos of daily commerce. Street vendors called out their wares. Cars honked in the gridlock. People hurried past, wrapped in their own concerns, unaware that something ancient and terrible had awakened in the desert and was making its way toward them. Police station, I told the driver in halting Arabic, then repeated it in English. The nearest one. Emergency. He nodded and made a sharp turn, weaving through the morning traffic with practiced ease. I leaned my head against the window, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. How could I explain what I'd seen? Richard being absorbed into that thing, the creature's telepathic invasion of my mind, its plans to consume humanity and awaken others like itself. The taxi pulled up outside a concrete building with peeling paint and a faded sign. I handed over more cash than necessary and stumbled out, my legs stiff from walking and then sitting. The police station was already busy, locals arguing with officers at the front desk, everyone talking over each other. I waited my turn, rehearsing what to say, knowing how it would sound. When I finally reached the desk, a young officer with tired eyes looked up at me. "I need to report something," I began in English. "Something dangerous, near the Red Pyramid at Dashur." His English was limited but functional. Tourist problem? Stolen items? No. Listen carefully. There's a creature. I stopped, seeing his expression shift from professional boredom to wary concern. I tried again. My colleague is dead, killed, at the archaeological site. That got his attention. He asked for details, names, times, locations. I gave him what I could, omitting the impossible parts. He made notes, then asked me to wait while he spoke with his superior. 20 minutes later, I sat across from a captain who spoke excellent English. He had a stern face and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Professor Belmont," he said, consulting the notes. "You claim your colleague, Dr. Hillman, is dead, yet you have no body to show us?" He was, I hesitated, consumed, completely. There's nothing left. Consumed? The captain raised an eyebrow. By what, exactly? This was the moment, the impossible leap of faith I was asking them to take. By something ancient, something that was imprisoned beneath the Red Pyramid for thousands of years. Richard released it by translating and speaking an ancient text. I held the captain's gaze. It's not human. It absorbs people, takes their knowledge, their consciousness. It's headed toward Cairo. The captain's face remained impassive, but his eyes had changed. He was no longer looking at me as a witness, but as a potential mental health case. I see. He closed his notebook. And this creature, can you describe it? I did, in excruciating detail. The segmented body, the hundreds of legs, those human eyes set in an alien face. As I spoke, the captain's expression grew increasingly concerned, though not in the way I'd hoped. "Professor Belmont," he said when I finished, "have you been taking any medications recently, or perhaps experimenting with local substances?" "I'm not on drugs. I'm not hallucinating." My voice rose with frustration. "People are going to die. Many people." The captain signaled to a younger officer. "Mr. Belmont, we will look into the whereabouts of Dr. Hillman. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. Perhaps visit the British Embassy. They can assist you." They were dismissing me, writing me off as another Western academic who'd cracked under the desert sun or taken something he shouldn't have. I stood up so abruptly that my chair toppled backward. "You're making a terrible mistake," I said. "By the time you realize I'm telling the truth, it might be too late." The captain nodded to the younger officer, who took my arm gently but firmly. "Officer Nassar will escort you out. Good day, Professor." I found myself on the street again, no closer to convincing anyone. The British Embassy was my next logical stop, but as I hailed another taxi, I knew I'd face the same problem there. Without proof, without Richard's body, who would believe me? The embassy was a modern building tucked behind security barriers. After clearing the security checkpoint and explaining I was a British citizen in distress, I was eventually shown to a small office where a woman in her 40s introduced herself as Margaret Phillips, Consular Services. "Professor Belmont," she said, looking over my passport. "What seems to be the problem?" I went through it all again, trying to focus on the credible parts. Richard's death, the chamber beneath the pyramid, the need for immediate action. But eventually, I had to explain the nature of the threat. Phillips listened more patiently than the police captain had, but her conclusion was the same. "Professor, what you're describing sounds like a traumatic experience, possibly compounded by exhaustion and dehydration." She pushed a glass of water toward me. "I'm concerned about your colleague, of course. We'll contact the proper authorities about Dr. Hillman's disappearance, but these other elements," she paused diplomatically, "they seem unlikely." "You think I'm making this up?" I asked, my voice hollow. "I think you believe what you're saying," she replied carefully, "which is why I'd like to arrange for you to speak with our medical officer." Another dead end. I declined her offer and left, growing increasingly desperate. The morning had become afternoon, and valuable hours were slipping away. Somewhere in or near Cairo, Amit was feeding, growing stronger. I found an internet cafe and spent an hour searching news sites for reports of strange disappearances or unusual incidents. Nothing obvious stood out. Then I checked my email, hoping against hope that Richard had somehow contacted me, that he'd escaped, that I'd imagined the whole thing. No messages from Richard, but there was an email from Sandra, my teaching assistant back in Cambridge, forwarding administrative messages about my sudden absence and requesting updates on when I'd return. The normalcy of it felt surreal, like a message from another life. I drafted a quick response, then paused with my fingers over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? That I'd watched my former friend be absorbed by an ancient entity and was now trying to warn a city of millions about impending doom. That I might never return to Cambridge because I was either going to die or be locked up in an Egyptian psychiatric facility. I deleted the draft and logged off. By evening, I was sitting in a small hotel room I'd paid for with the last of my cash, watching local news on a small television, hoping to see something that might corroborate my story. My phone showed no service. I'd need to buy a local SIM card to make calls. The TV droned on in Arabic, occasionally switching to English for international stories. I was about to give up when a breaking news banner appeared. My limited Arabic wasn't enough to understand the details, but the footage showed police vehicles and what looked like scientific equipment near the Giza Plateau. I changed to an English language channel and waited for the news to cycle around. 20 minutes later, I got what I needed. Unusual seismic activity has been detected near Egypt's famed pyramids, the newscaster said. Scientists report multiple small earthquakes centered around the Dashur archaeological site, particularly near the Red Pyramid. Authorities have temporarily closed the site to tourists while experts investigate the phenomenon, which some scientists are calling unprecedented in the region. I sat up straight, heart pounding. This was it, physical evidence that something was happening. I immediately tried to think of who might take me seriously now. The archaeological community? The Egyptian Antiquities Ministry? As I contemplated my next move, my hotel room phone rang, startling me. I picked it up cautiously. Professor Belmont? The voice was male, Egyptian accented but fluent in English. Yes, who's calling? My name is Colonel Nasir with Egyptian Military Intelligence. A car is waiting for you downstairs. Please come immediately. I hesitated, suspicious of the timing. How did you find me? The British Embassy logged your passport information when you visited earlier. It wasn't difficult. The voice turned harder. This is not a request, Professor. We need to speak with you about the incident at Dashur. The line went dead before I could respond. I considered my options. This could be a trap, but set by whom? If the military was actually taking me seriously, this might be my only chance to make someone listen. And if Amit was somehow behind this, well, it already knew where to find me if it wanted to. 5 minutes later, I stepped outside the hotel to find a black SUV with tinted windows waiting. A man in civilian clothes opened the door without a word. I got in, finding myself seated across from a lean, severe-looking man in a crisp military uniform adorned with insignia I didn't recognize. Colonel Nasir? I asked. He nodded once. Professor Belmont, thank you for joining us. He spoke with clipped precision as the vehicle pulled into traffic. Approximately 12 hours ago, you reported a fantastic story to Cairo police about a creature emerging from beneath the Red Pyramid. They dismissed you as delusional. Yes, I said, not bothering to hide my bitterness. 3 hours ago, we detected seismic anomalies centered precisely at the location you described. 2 hours ago, we began receiving reports of missing persons in villages between Dashur and Cairo. My stomach dropped. It's already started. Nasir studied me with calculating eyes. What exactly has started, Professor? I need the complete story. No omissions. So I told him everything, from Richard's letter to the chamber beneath the pyramid, the moving hieroglyphs, the recitation, and finally, Amit's emergence and Richard's death. I described the creature in detail and related its telepathic communication about consuming humans and freeing others of its kind. Nasir listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When I finished, the SUV was passing through a checkpoint into what appeared to be a military compound on the outskirts of Cairo. "Under normal circumstances," Nasir said as we parked, "I would have you evaluated by psychiatric professionals. But circumstances are not normal." He opened a tablet and showed me satellite thermal imaging of the area around the Red Pyramid. "Something is moving below the surface, creating heat signatures and seismic disturbances as it goes." He swiped to another screen, police reports. 7 people missing from a small settlement near Dashur. No signs of struggle, simply vanished. Another swipe. 3 maintenance workers disappeared from a water treatment facility. Security cameras show them entering a room. They never came out. The room had no other exits. "It's Amit," I whispered, "just like it showed me. Invisible until it attacks, consuming people and growing stronger." "Perhaps," Nasir said, neither confirming nor denying. "What I know for certain is that we face an unknown threat, and you are currently our only source of information about it." He fixed me with a hard stare. "Can you lead us back to this chamber?" "You believe me?" I asked, still not quite trusting this turn of events. "I believe something is happening that requires investigation, and you have relevant information." Nasir's expression remained neutral. "Whether this is some advanced technology, a biological weapon, or..." He paused fractionally. "Something more ancient, we must respond." The SUV door opened, and Nasir gestured for me to follow him. We walked into a building where a group of soldiers in specialized combat gear was gathered around a table covered with maps and equipment. "This is Professor Belmont," Nasir announced. "He will brief you on the target and the location." 8 pairs of eyes turned to examine me, measuring, assessing, skeptical. These men were Egypt's elite forces, hardened professionals who dealt in certainties, and I was about to tell them they were hunting something from beyond human understanding. A tall captain stepped forward. "I am Captain Khalid. My team will escort you to the pyramid and secure the site." His tone made it clear he wasn't thrilled about taking direction from a civilian, especially one who had been spouting tales of monsters. "The creature isn't at the pyramid anymore," I said. "It's out here, hunting." "Nevertheless," Nasir interrupted, "the chamber you described is our starting point. If this entity has others of its kind imprisoned there, we need to know." The reality of what they were asking hit me suddenly. They wanted me to go back, to return to the place where I'd watched Richard die, where I'd fled in terror. "I can't," I said, my voice cracking. "You don't understand what this thing is capable of." "Explain it to us then," Captain Khalid challenged. "Help us understand what we're facing." I looked around at the soldiers, their expressions ranging from open skepticism to guarded curiosity. How could I make them comprehend the nature of Amut? These men were trained to fight human enemies, not ancient entities with powers beyond physical understanding. "It's not just physically dangerous," I began slowly. "It gets inside your mind, communicates telepathically, shows you things, memories, visions. It's intelligent, incredibly old and intelligent, and it regards humans as food, as vessels to absorb." One of the soldiers snorted softly in disbelief, but Khalid silenced him with a look. "Can it be killed?" Khalid asked bluntly. I hadn't considered the question. I don't know. The ancient Egyptians didn't kill it. They imprisoned it, bound it somehow using those hieroglyphs. Nasir, who had been silent during this exchange, stepped forward. "Then our mission has 2 objectives. Contain this threat if possible, eliminate it if necessary." He turned to me. "Professor Belmont, your knowledge is essential to this operation. We need you to guide us back to the chamber and help us understand these hieroglyphs." "I'm not a soldier," I protested. "I'm an archaeologist." "And we are facing what you claim is an ancient entity," Nasir replied. "Who better to assist us?" Fear clawed at my insides. The thought of facing Amit again, of returning to that chamber where Richard had been consumed. But Nasir was right. I possessed knowledge no one else had. If there was any hope of stopping Amit, it lay in understanding how the ancient Egyptians had bound it in the first place. "I'll need access to proper equipment," I said finally, "and references, any archaeological data you can get on pre-dynastic Egyptian binding rituals." Nasir nodded, satisfied. "We'll provide whatever you need. Captain Khalid's team moves out at 2100 hours. That gives you 3 hours to prepare." As the soldiers returned to their planning, Nasir led me to a side room set up as a temporary office. Computers, reference materials, and equipment had been hastily assembled. "We're taking this seriously, Professor," Nasir said, noting my surprise. "Whether your explanation is correct or not, the threat is real. 17 civilians have vanished without trace in the past 12 hours, and the pattern of disappearances is moving steadily toward Cairo's more populated areas." A young lieutenant entered with a tablet. "Sir, new thermal anomalies detected in Giza," he reported, showing Nasir the screen. "And 3 more missing persons reports from the same area." Nasir's expression darkened. "It's accelerating." "It's feeding," I corrected grimly. "Each person it absorbs makes it stronger, gives it more knowledge." I remembered Amit's telepathic message. "With each human I consume, I gain strength. With enough strength, I can release my brethren." "How do we kill it?" Nasir demanded, his calm facade cracking slightly. "I told you, I don't know if we can, but in the chamber." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to recall details despite the trauma associated with them. The walls were covered with hieroglyphs, not just the main slab that Richard activated. There were symbols all around the room, and he mentioned the chamber had been built in stages, with the earliest construction predating the pyramid itself. Meaning what? Meaning the original purpose of that chamber wasn't just to imprison Amut, but to contain the means of binding it, the knowledge, the ritual. I felt a surge of desperate hope. If we can get back there, if I can translate enough of those symbols, maybe we can find the binding ritual the ancients used. Nasir considered this, then nodded sharply. "You have 3 hours. Lieutenant Fayez will assist you in accessing any references you need." He turned to leave, then paused. "Professor Belmont, you should know, if we cannot contain this threat through your archaeological methods, we will resort to more conventional ones." "What does that mean?" "It means that if necessary, we will destroy the chamber, the pyramid, and anything else required to eliminate this entity." His eyes were hard. "Egypt has faced many invaders throughout history. We will not fall to this one." After he left, I sat down heavily at the desk, suddenly aware of the immensity of the task before me. 3 hours to prepare for a confrontation with an entity that had been considered a god by the ancient Egyptians, armed with nothing but partial translations and military backup that might be useless against such a creature. Lieutenant Fayez, a young officer with an eager expression, cleared his throat. "Professor, what references do you need to begin?" I took a deep breath. There was no time for fear or doubt. "Start with anything you can find on pre-dynastic binding rituals, and I need satellite images of the chamber if you have them, every wall, every inscription." As Fayez began typing rapidly on his keyboard, I tried to focus on the task rather than the memories of Richard's death or the terrifying prospect of returning to that chamber. I was no longer a curious academic following a colleague's discovery. I was now the reluctant guide for a military strike team against an ancient horror. The lieutenant looked up from his screen. "Sir, the team quartermaster needs your measurements for body armor." I nodded numbly. In just a few hours, I would be heading back to Dashur, back to the pyramid, back to face the darkness that had consumed Richard and now threatened to consume us all. Not as an archaeologist seeking knowledge, but as the only person who might know how to save humanity from a threat it had forgotten existed. Outside the window, the Cairo skyline glittered with lights as evening settled over the city. Somewhere out there, Amit was moving, feeding, growing stronger. And I was its only known adversary, an academic thrust into a role I never wanted, carrying knowledge I wished I didn't possess. 3 hours wasn't nearly. I sat in the back of the military transport vehicle, the weight of body armor unfamiliar on my frame. The desert night stretched around us, illuminated only by our vehicle headlights as we approached the Red Pyramid. Captain Khalid and his team checked their weapons with practiced efficiency, though I doubted conventional firearms would have any effect on Amit. We all knew it, but no one said it aloud. 5 minutes, Khalid announced, his voice tense but controlled. Lieutenant Fayez had proven surprisingly knowledgeable about archaeological databases, helping me access digital archives of pre-dynastic texts that might contain references to binding rituals. We'd found fragmentary mentions of containment chambers and prisons of the ancient ones, but nothing specific enough to constitute a complete ritual. "Professor," Nasir said from beside me, breaking my reverie. "Walk us through it again." I nodded, focusing on the facts rather than my growing dread. We enter through the maintenance door, descend through the standard tourist passages, then access the hidden corridor Richard discovered. The chamber is approximately 40 meters below ground level. Based on the thermal imaging, Amit isn't currently in the chamber. It's hunting elsewhere. "And these other slabs you mentioned?" Nasir pressed. "Richard only activated one," I explained. But his notes suggested the chamber might contain references to other entities. If I'm right, the hieroglyphs on the walls might give us clues about how to bind Amit again. Khalid made a small noise of disbelief. "Magic spells against a monster." "Not magic," I corrected automatically. The ancient Egyptians were sophisticated engineers. If they built a mechanism to contain this entity once, we might be able to reactivate it. The vehicle slowed as we approached the pyramid complex. Unlike my previous visits, the site was now ringed with military vehicles and portable floodlights. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their weapons at the ready. "No civilians for 2 kilometers, Nasir noted with satisfaction. "The area has been completely secured." We disembarked, and I felt the cold desert air against my face. The pyramid loomed above us, its ancient stone gleaming dully in the artificial light. Knowing what lay beneath its foundations made it seem more ominous than ever. "Team Alpha will accompany us inside," Khalid instructed. "Team Beta maintains perimeter security and monitors for the target's approach." A soldier handed me a tactical vest equipped with a radio and attached a small camera to my shoulder. "For the command center," he explained. "They'll monitor everything we see." I checked the tablet computer they'd given me, loaded with photographs of the hieroglyphs I'd already translated and reference materials I might need. Then, unable to delay any longer, I led the way to the maintenance entrance Richard had shown me just 2 nights ago. The lock was still in place. Richard's lock, I remembered with a pang of grief. A soldier stepped forward with bolt cutters and made quick work of it. The door swung open with a creak that echoed through the darkness beyond. "I'll take point," Khalid said, activating a tactical flashlight mounted on his rifle. "Professor, stay behind me. Lieutenant Abbas, rear guard." We entered in silence, our footsteps echoing on the ancient stone. The standard tourist passages seemed smaller now, crowded with armed men moving in tactical formation. I tried to focus on guiding them, pushing away memories of Richard's excitement as he led me through these same corridors. When we reached the antechamber with the Guardian relief figure, I paused. This is where it begins. Richard found the hidden passage by interpreting a text fragment about behind the Guardian's left shoulder. I moved to the wall and pressed the stone block Richard had shown me. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, and I feared the mechanism had somehow been damaged. Then, with a grating sound, the block receded, revealing the crude passage beyond. "Tight quarters," Khalid observed, shining his light down the narrow corridor. "Single file. Stay alert." The passage seemed longer than I remembered, the descent steeper. The air grew noticeably colder as we moved deeper beneath the pyramid, and I was grateful for the tactical vest's insulation. Behind me, I heard the measured breathing of Nasir and the occasional whispered communication between soldiers through their radios. Finally, we emerged into the antechamber carved from bedrock. Unlike the upper chambers, which bore the refined craftsmanship of 4th Dynasty stonework, this space showed the cruder techniques of pre-dynastic construction. Our lights swept across walls covered in primitive hieroglyphs mixed with symbols I didn't recognize from any known writing system. "This isn't Egyptian," Nasir murmured, examining the markings. "Not entirely," I agreed. Richard believed it was a hybrid script, early Egyptian combined with something older. Khalid gestured for his men to secure the antechamber. "Which way to the main chamber?" I pointed to a low archway on the far side. "Through there. That's where Richard activated the slab, where Amit emerged." We moved forward cautiously. The main chamber opened before us, vast and cold. Our lights revealed what Richard and I had seen before. The 7-foot black basalt slab now split down the middle with a jagged crack from which Amit had emerged. But with the improved lighting from the military team, I saw something Richard hadn't shown me. The chamber wasn't merely a room. It was an octagonal space with 8 walls, and on each wall was mounted a basalt slab identical to the one Richard had activated, each covered in the same dense, angular hieroglyphs. "My God," I breathed. "It's not just Amut. There are 8 of them." 8? Nasir stepped forward, his composure momentarily broken. 8 of these creatures? I moved closer to examine the intact slabs. Unlike the one Richard had activated, these remained solid, their hieroglyphs dormant. Yet they seemed to absorb our light, as if the stone itself consumed illumination. "Professor," Khalid called, directing his light toward the ceiling. "Look at this." Above us, the ceiling was not flat, but domed, and carved into its surface was an elaborate star map. Constellations I recognized, and many I didn't, arranged in a pattern that made no astronomical sense. At the center of the dome was a circular stone disk that seemed to match the floor pattern directly beneath it. "Some kind of mechanism," I said, excitement momentarily overriding my fear. "The whole chamber is a machine." I began examining the intact slabs more carefully, noting variations in the hieroglyphs. Each seemed to describe a different entity, different aspects, different powers. The one Richard had activated contained repeated references to devourer and consumer of knowledge. Others mentioned breaker of minds, shaper of flesh, bringer of endless night. As I was explaining this to Nasir, a soldier's radio crackled with static. "Command to Alpha Team. Thermal anomaly detected moving rapidly toward your position. Estimated arrival 3 minutes." Khalid immediately organized his men into defensive positions. "Professor, you need to figure out how this mechanism works. Now." I turned back to the walls, frantically searching for clues. The hieroglyphs were only part of it. There had to be physical components to the binding ritual. I remembered Richard's notes about the chamber being built in stages, the earliest construction predating the pyramid itself. "The floor," I said suddenly. "Look at the patterns in the floor stones." The soldiers' lights revealed what my earlier visits had missed. The floor was inlaid with a subtle pattern of lines radiating from the center, connecting to each of the 8 walls. And at each connection point was a small recess, like a keyhole. "There's something missing," I realized. "Keys or components that activate the mechanism." Nasir joined me in examining the floor. Where would these components be kept? Before I could answer, the temperature in the chamber plummeted dramatically. Our breath became visible, and the lights dimmed as if struggling against some force that absorbed their energy. A low vibration built in the stone beneath our feet. "It's coming," I whispered. Khalid barked orders to his men, who trained their weapons on the chamber entrance. But the attack came from an unexpected direction: the ceiling. The stone began to ripple like liquid. and through it emerged the massive segmented form of Amit, pouring into the chamber like oil flowing downward. It was larger than before, much larger. Where Richard had seen a creature perhaps 20 feet long, it now stretched nearly twice that length, its hundreds of legs moving in perfect coordination as it positioned itself around the circumference of the chamber, partially encircling us. Those human eyes fixed on me with recognition, and a familiar pressure built in my mind as it established telepathic contact. "You have brought me more nourishment, little scholar." Amit's voice resonated directly in my thoughts. "How considerate." One of the soldiers screamed and fired his weapon. The bullets struck Amit's segmented body but seemed to pass through without causing damage, as if the creature's form wasn't entirely solid. "Your primitive weapons cannot harm me," Amit projected, the thought accompanied by a sensation of amusement that turned my stomach. "I exist in dimensions beyond your perception." "Hold your fire," Khalid ordered, but another soldier had already dropped his weapon and was clutching his head, eyes wide with terror. "Make it stop," he cried. "Get them out of my head." I realized with horror that Amit was attacking them telepathically, forcing visions or thoughts into their minds as it had done to me in the desert. The creature was toying with us, savoring our fear. Nasir grabbed my arm. "The mechanism, Professor. Find it now." I tore my attention away from Amit and back to the floor pattern. The recesses in the floor, they needed something to activate them. My eyes darted around the chamber, searching for anything that might serve as keys. The dying screams of a soldier pulled my attention back to the horror unfolding around me. Amit had seized him with lightning speed, wrapping its segmented body around the man. Just as with Richard, the soldier's flesh seemed to dissolve where the creature touched him, absorbed rather than torn. "Delicious," Amit's voice purred in our minds. His fear flavors the consumption. The remaining soldiers fired in desperate bursts, but Amit flowed around the bullets, its movement impossible to track or predict. Another soldier fell to his knees, gun forgotten as he clawed at his own face, driven to madness by whatever visions Amit had forced into his consciousness. I forced myself to focus, to think like an archaeologist despite the chaos. The keys to the mechanism, where would the ancient Egyptians have hidden them? Not far from the mechanism itself, but secure enough to prevent accidental activation. My eyes landed on the broken slab from which Amit had emerged. Unlike the others, this one had fractured completely, revealing a small alcove behind it. An alcove that would have been inaccessible when the slab was intact. I dashed toward it, narrowly avoiding Amit's reaching limbs. Inside the alcove was a collection of small stone discs, each carved with symbols matching those on the slabs. "The keys!" I shouted, grabbing them. "I found them!" Khalid was now firing controlled bursts at Amit, not to harm it, but to distract it. "Whatever you're going to do it fast. We're losing men." I ran to the center of the chamber, the stone discs clutched in my hands. Each had a protrusion on one side that looked like it would fit the recesses in the floor, but there were 8 recesses and only 7 discs. "One is missing," I realized aloud. "The one for Amit's slab." Amit's telepathic laughter filled my mind. "The priest king who imprisoned me was wiser than you. He removed the key to ensure I could never be bound again if released." I refused to accept defeat. The mechanism was engineered, not magical. There had to be a way to activate it. I began placing the stone discs into the recesses that corresponded with the intact slabs, hoping it might be enough to trigger the system. As each disc locked into place, the floor pattern began to glow with a faint blue luminescence similar to what we'd seen when Richard activated the hieroglyphs. The chamber trembled slightly, the star pattern on the ceiling shifting in response. "It's working," I called to Nasir, who was helping a wounded soldier. But Amit was not idle. It surged toward me, its segmented body moving with impossible speed. I scrambled away, but not before one of its limbs brushed my leg. Pain shot through me, a burning, dissolving sensation as it began to absorb my flesh. Nasir fired directly into the segment touching me, and miraculously, it withdrew. The mechanism, Professor. Complete it. 6 of the 7 discs were in place, each pulsing with blue energy that flowed through the floor patterns toward the center. But without the 8th disc, Amit's disc, the circuit remained incomplete. Amit reared up, its form towering over us. Your species has forgotten its place, it projected into our minds. You were meant to be our sustenance, our vessels. We taught you to build, to write, to worship, and you repaid us with imprisonment. More soldiers fell, some to madness, others consumed by Amit's touch. Only Khalid, Nasir, and 2 others remained functional, forming a protective ring around me as I worked. There has to be a substitute, I muttered, examining the final empty recess. Something to complete the circuit. The central floor stone, the one directly beneath the ceiling disc, began to rise slightly as the mechanism activated. I suddenly understood. The ancient engineers had built a failsafe. "The ceiling!" I shouted to Khalid. "The disc in the ceiling, it's a counterweight." Khalid looked up, following my gaze. "What do we do?" "We need to trigger it somehow, break its supports." Without hesitation, Khalid aimed his rifle upward and fired several rounds at the juncture where the ceiling disc met the dome. Stone fragments rained down, but the disc remained in place. Amut, sensing our plan, moved with renewed fury. One of the remaining soldiers screamed as he was lifted off his feet and absorbed into the creature's mass. Nasir was knocked backward, his rifle skittering across the floor. "It's not working!" Khalid shouted, reloading. I scanned the chamber desperately, looking for another approach. My eyes landed on the floor mechanism again. The central stone was still rising slowly, creating a pedestal, and around its base were small carved protrusions. Handholds, I realized. It's manual. I dove for the center of the room, ignoring the pain in my injured leg. Reaching the rising stone, I found the handholds and began to turn it counterclockwise. The stone resisted at first, then gave way with a grinding sound. Above us, the ceiling disc shifted slightly. "Keep them off me," I yelled to Khalid, who was now the only soldier still standing. He fired in controlled bursts, moving in a circle around me as Amit flowed across the walls and ceiling, trying to reach us. The blue energy from the floor pattern intensified, racing up the walls to the intact slabs. "You cannot bind me again," Amit's voice thundered in my mind, accompanied by visions of its brethren awakening across the world, consuming city after city. I kept turning the central stone, muscles straining against the ancient mechanism. Each rotation raised the central pedestal further and shifted the ceiling disc more precariously. "Almost there," I gasped. Amit made a final, desperate lunge toward me. Khalid stepped between us, emptying his magazine directly into the creature's advancing form. It barely slowed, engulfing him in a mass of writhing segments. His screams cut off abruptly as he was absorbed. I was alone now, the last human standing in the chamber. With a final, desperate heave, I rotated the central stone one last time. The mechanism locked into place with a resonant click that shook the entire chamber. Above, the ceiling disc broke free from its supports entirely, plummeting downward with the weight of thousands of pounds of solid stone. I threw myself to the side as the massive disc crashed onto the central pedestal, shattering it and continuing downward with terrible momentum. Amit, still in the center of the room, was caught directly beneath it. The impact was deafening. The creature screamed, not telepathically, but with a physical sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The disc pinned its massive body to the floor, crushing segments and preventing it from flowing away. Blue energy erupted from the floor pattern, racing up to engulf Amit in crackling arcs. The hieroglyphs on the intact slabs glowed with the same energy, pulsing in a synchronized rhythm. "This is not an ending," Amit's voice whispered in my mind, weaker now, but still present. Only a pause in the inevitable. The creature's body was dissolving beneath the stone disc, not being absorbed as Richard had been, but breaking apart into particles of black smoke that were drawn toward the intact slabs on the walls. "We were here before you," Amit continued, its mental voice fading. We will be here after. My brethren sleep across your world, waiting. When they wake, there will be no reprieve for your kind. You won't be here to see it, I said aloud, watching as more of its form disintegrated. A sensation like laughter, tinged with pain but still malevolent, touched my mind. Time means nothing to us, little scholar. 1,000 years, 10,000. We will return, and we remember those who opposed us. The last of Amit's form dissolved into smoke that was absorbed by the slabs. The blue energy flickered, then faded, leaving the chamber in darkness except for the beam of a single remaining flashlight. I lay on the stone floor, breathing heavily, surrounded by the dead. The chamber was silent now, the mechanism once again dormant. The fallen ceiling disc rested at the center, embedded in the shattered remains of the pedestal. I don't know how long I remained there before I heard voices calling from the passageway. Reinforcements had arrived, too late to save anyone but me. As medics helped me from the chamber, I looked back at the 7 intact slabs. Amit was gone, for now, but its final words echoed in my thoughts. My brethren sleep across your world, waiting. 7 more entities remained in this chamber alone, and if Amit's telepathic visions were true, there were others imprisoned beneath ancient sites around the globe. This hadn't been a final victory, but merely the closing of one door while countless others remained, waiting to be opened by the unwary or the ambitious. I limped through the passage, supported by a medic, leaving behind the dead and a chamber that would soon be sealed by modern means to supplement the ancient bindings. But as we emerged, I returned to London 4 weeks after the incident at Dashur. The physical wounds had mostly healed. My leg now bore only a faint purplish scar where Amit had touched me, but the mental ones remained raw and bleeding. Colonel Nasir had arranged my departure from Egypt with quiet efficiency, after extensive debriefings and the signing of multiple confidentiality agreements. The official story, a tragic accident during an unauthorized excavation, had claimed the lives of Richard Hillman and several military personnel sent to investigate. No mention of ancient entities or binding chambers, no acknowledgement of what really happened beneath the Red Pyramid. My flat felt smaller than I remembered, its familiar surroundings now somehow alien. I stood in the doorway for several minutes, looking at my bookshelves laden with academic texts, my desk with its neat stacks of papers, the photographs of archaeological digs framed on the walls, evidence of a life that no longer felt like mine. I slept poorly that first night back, and all the nights that followed. When I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face in that final moment of rapture and terror as Amit consumed him. I felt the cold pressure of alien thoughts forcing their way into my mind. I heard that voice. My brethren sleep across your world, waiting. Cambridge welcomed me back with the polite curiosity typical of academic institutions. My department head accepted my vague explanation about a family emergency without pressing for details, though I caught the skepticism in his eyes. My teaching assistant Sandra had maintained my classes admirably in my absence and seemed genuinely happy to see me return. "The students missed you," she told me as we walked across the campus on my first day back. Professor Marshall's lectures on Mesopotamian cultural exchange weren't nearly as engaging as yours. I nodded and made some appropriate response, but my mind was elsewhere. The red brick buildings and manicured lawns of Cambridge seemed fragile now, a thin veneer of civilization laid over something much older and more terrible. I tried to lose myself in work. I updated lecture notes, met with graduate students about their thesis projects, and attended faculty meetings where my colleagues debated curriculum changes and funding priorities with passion that now struck me as absurdly misplaced. How could they argue about course requirements when ancient horrors slept beneath the earth? At night, I pored over every reference I could find to pre-dynastic Egyptian binding rituals, searching for connections to similar practices in other ancient cultures. I ordered obscure texts from university libraries across Europe, compiled notes, and created timelines of megalithic construction worldwide. The work kept the nightmares at bay, if only for a few hours. 2 months after my return, Sandra knocked on my office door one Tuesday afternoon. I had been staring at a map of global archaeological sites, red pins marking locations where ancient civilizations had constructed massive stone monuments with no clear technological means to do so. "Professor Belmont, there's a package for you." She placed a thick manila envelope on my desk. I thanked her, barely glancing up until she'd closed the door behind her. The envelope bore no return address, only my name and department typed on a plain white label. Inside was a smaller sealed envelope and a USB drive. The letter inside was typed on plain paper, unsigned. "Professor Belmont, the Egyptian military believes secrecy is the best approach to what happened at Dashur. I disagree. Enclosed, you will find copies of our final reports, thermal imaging data, and photographs taken during the retrieval of bodies from the chamber. The official archives have been purged of this material. 8 people died that night. Their families were told lies about training accidents. Their sacrifice deserves better, as does the truth about what we encountered. The chamber has been sealed with concrete and placed under 24-hour military guard. For now, the threat is contained. But I cannot forget what the entity claimed about others of its kind across the world. Watch for patterns, trust your instincts, and know you have at least one ally who believes what you saw." A friend, I plugged the USB drive into my computer with shaking hands. It contained exactly what the letter promised: the complete military documentation of that night in the chamber. Thermal imaging showed Amut's heat signature as it moved through the chamber. High-resolution photographs captured the hieroglyphs on each of the 7 remaining slabs. Most disturbing were the images taken after the battle, the bodies of soldiers partially dissolved where Amut had touched them, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. I worked late into the night, copying the files and storing them in multiple secure locations. I printed the clearest images of the hieroglyphs and added them to my growing research collection. Around 3 in the morning, I finally returned to my flat, mentally exhausted but too wired to sleep. The weeks that followed settled into an uneasy routine. By day, I taught my classes and maintained the appearance of a normal academic life. By night, I pursued my private research, searching for patterns that might connect ancient sites around the world. I avoided social gatherings and deflected colleagues' concerns about my withdrawn behavior with claims of working on a new research paper. Sandra was the only one who seemed truly worried. "You've been back almost 3 months," she said one day after a lecture, "but you're not really back, are you?" I managed to smile. "Just readjusting. Takes time. If you need to talk about whatever happened." She left the offer hanging. "Thank you, but I'm fine." The lie came easily now, after so much practice. 4 months after my return to London, another envelope arrived. This one came through regular mail to my flat, not my office. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, the postmark from Mexico City. Inside was a single sheet of paper and several photographs. "Alex, I hope this letter finds you well. It's been years since we worked together at Teotihuacan, but I've been following your publications with interest. Your recent absence from academic circles sparked some concern among colleagues. I'm writing because something unusual has been happening at a site I'm working on near Palenque. We've discovered a previously unknown chamber beneath the Temple of Inscriptions, with architectural elements that predate the Maya by at least 1,000 years. The enclosed photos show hieroglyphs unlike any Maya script I've encountered. What's most disturbing is their similarity to fragments found at other pre-classic sites across Mexico. References to those who taught from beyond, vessels of flesh, and binding stones appear repeatedly. 2 weeks ago, we began experiencing equipment failures near the chamber. Batteries drain instantly, digital cameras malfunction. Last week, 3 local workers refused to enter the chamber, claiming they heard voices in their heads and saw the glyphs moving. I dismissed these accounts until yesterday, when I observed the phenomenon myself. The attached photo is poor quality, the only one that developed properly. But if you look closely at the central stone panel, you can see what appears to be a shift in the glyph pattern compared to the reference shot taken the previous day. I know how this sounds. I've considered logical explanations, light tricks, weathering of the stone, simple misperception. None fit what I've witnessed. I thought of you because of your work on cross-cultural mythological parallels. Have you encountered anything similar in your research? I would value your perspective, or better yet, your expertise in person if you can spare the time for a consultation visit. The university has funding available for external advisors. With respect, Dr. Elena Vasquez. My hands trembled as I examined the photographs. The quality was poor, blurry and underexposed, but what I could make out sent ice through my veins. The stone panel in the Mexican chamber bore glyphs that, while not identical to those in the Egyptian chamber, shared unmistakable structural elements. The same angular forms, the same oppressive density of symbols packed tightly together. And in the second photo, taken a day later, the pattern had indeed shifted subtly, exactly as the hieroglyphs beneath the Red Pyramid had moved when observed over time. I sat heavily in my armchair, Elena's letter crushed in my fist. My vision blurred as memories flooded back, the chamber beneath Dashur, Richard's face as he chanted the words of unbinding, Amit's segmented form pouring through the broken slab, those human eyes in an alien face. Amit's final warning hadn't been empty threat or simple malice. It had been the truth. The entities weren't just imprisoned in Egypt. They were contained at ancient sites worldwide, bound by similar technologies adapted to local architectural styles and writing systems. I pulled out my map of archaeological sites and stared at the red pins marking megalithic structures. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Stonehenge in England, the massive Moai of Easter Island, Teotihuacan and Palenque in Mexico, pyramids in China, Indonesia, and Bosnia, ancient stone cities in Peru and Bolivia. Each pin now represented not just a mystery of ancient engineering, but a potential prison for entities like Amut. How many were there? Dozens? Hundreds? And how many, like the chamber in Mexico, were beginning to stir as archaeologists unwittingly disturbed their containment mechanisms? I spent the night cross-referencing Elena's photographs with my notes from Egypt, finding more similarities than differences. By dawn, my living room floor was covered with papers, photos, and open books. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. The same basic technology for binding these entities had been implemented globally, adapted to local materials and cultural contexts. The question that haunted me most was, who had taught prehistoric humans to build these prisons? How had pre-dynastic Egyptians, pre-classic Maya, and other ancient peoples separated by vast distances developed such similar containment systems without modern communication? The answer came in Amut's own telepathic words, "We taught you to build, to write, to worship." These entities had been the teachers of early humanity, positioning themselves as gods to be venerated while simultaneously creating the means of their own imprisonment when humans grew wise enough to recognize the threat they posed. I made tea with shaking hands as morning light filtered through my windows. 4 months of trying to return to normal life, and now this. Confirmation that Amit was merely one prisoner among many, and that others were stirring. Elena's invitation to Mexico hung in the air like a challenge. Part of me wanted to burn her letter, delete the files from Nasir, and force myself back into the comfortable academic life I'd once led. Pretend that what happened in Egypt was an isolated incident, now resolved. But I knew better. The knowledge I possessed about the binding chambers, the containment mechanisms, the nature of these ancient entities, might be crucial in preventing another release. If the glyphs in Mexico were already moving, time could be short. I picked up my phone and dialed my department head's office number. Marshall speaking. "It's Alex Belmont," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to request another leave of absence. Research opportunity in Mexico. Quite urgent." A sigh from the other end. "Alex, you just returned from an extended absence. The department has schedule commitments. I understand, but this is important." I paused, searching for words that would convince him without revealing the truth. It's related to what happened in Egypt. I can't explain further, but it could be significant for my field. Silence stretched between us. Finally. How long? 2 weeks initially, possibly longer. The dean won't be pleased. There will be questions. I know. I'll submit the formal request today. After ending the call, I sat at my desk and began composing a reply to Elena. I would accept her invitation, arrive within the week, and offer whatever expertise I could. But I couldn't tell her everything, not yet, not until I'd seen the chamber myself and gauged how far the awakening had progressed. As I wrote, I fought against the creeping dread that had become my constant companion. What if the Mexican entity was closer to breaking free than Amit had been when Richard first found the chamber? What if there was no convenient military force to help contain it? What if I was already too late? I finished the email and sent it, then began making travel arrangements. My academic life in London would have to wait. Perhaps it would have to wait indefinitely. I was no longer just Dr. Alexander Belmont, respected archaeologist and professor. I had become something else, reluctant guardian of a terrible secret, witness to an ancient horror, perhaps the only person alive who understood the true purpose of humanity's oldest monuments. That night, I dreamed of pyramid complexes and stone circles worldwide, each pulsing with a subtle blue light that grew steadily brighter as something beneath the earth strained against ancient bonds. I saw chambers like the one at Dashur hidden beneath famous archaeological sites, their stone slabs beginning to crack. I heard whispers in a language no human tongue was meant to speak, growing louder as they echoed across continents. I woke gasping, sheets tangled around me, the bedroom cold despite the season. For a moment, I thought I felt that familiar pressure against my mind, alien thoughts seeking entry. But it faded as consciousness fully returned. Outside my window, London continued as it always had. People hurried to work, buses rumbled past, a new day began. None of them knew what lurked beneath the world's ancient monuments. None of them understood that humanity's dominance was built on forgotten victories against entities that viewed us as food and vessels. None of them knew that those entities were beginning to wake up. I showered, dressed, and packed a bag for Mexico. Whatever waited beneath the temple of inscriptions at Palenque, whether a fully formed horror like Amut or merely the stirring of something not yet fully conscious, I would face it with open eyes, not because I was brave, but because I had no choice. The knowledge I carried came with responsibility. My brethren sleep across your world, waiting, not if I could help it.